Welcome to the Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022 Garrison Board of Education Workshop Meeting. Dusty, will you call the roll for us, please?
Jocelyn Apicello. Here. David Gelber. Here. Madeline Julian. Here. Courtney McCarthy. Here. Kent Schacht. Here. Matthew Spicer. Here. Sarah Tormey.
Here. Now the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Next up, we have accept agenda changes. Do I have any recommended changes from the board this evening? Okay. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby accept the agenda as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays, abstentions. Thank you. Okay, first up this evening on our presentations is the budget. We have moved the discussion of the calendar as we had some additional requests come in and we would like to take some time with those. So I will ask the board to please hold your questions till the end of the budget presentation, and we can always refer back to slides. I'm now going to turn it over to the chair of our finance committee, who's going to give a little introduction to this presentation. Kent?
Yes.
He's going to have to pull his microphone a whole lot closer.
Well, it's easier to talk without masks, so this is nice. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out tonight. I'm really pleased to introduce Joe and Carl to talk about the first step of adopting the budget this year. To be clear, the goal of tonight's meeting is not to talk about final decisions, but really introduce the situation that we're in, the challenges that we face, and then from here integrate board and public feedback to get to a final place where we all feel comfortable. I think it's fair to say I'm new to the board, but this is going to be a new situation in Garrison where it's a little more challenging than in past years. So we're definitely going to have a lot of work in front of us as far as making some challenging decisions and figuring out the best course of action over the next couple of months. But I really want to thank Joe and Carl in advance. You guys are top-notch professionals. You put a ton of work into this and done a lot of thinking, answered a lot of questions. So really appreciative of all the hard work and excited to go forward. So thanks.
Good evening, everyone. So I will begin our budget discussion, going to kind of frame the situation that we're in this year, and then for the financial details, I will turn it over to our business official, Joe Jimick. So Dusty, if you can go right to that first slide. So we'll start with objectives. Basically, a lot of these objectives are similar to our last year's budget. First is to be transparent with our community, of course, with our board, but also to get input. And it's, I'm pleased to see a large audience here this evening because we do appreciate and value input from the board members as well as the community. So that is a goal, and that is something that we're striving for, and know that it's welcomed. The second bullet talks about analyzing components of our budget that are increasing disproportionately to other areas or to the allowable tax levy increase. So as most people know, the tax levy increase, we are limited to 2% increases. The only way to have an override is to go out there and request a 60% supermajority approval from your public. However, there are aspects of the budget you will see later in the presentation that are going up at a much higher rate. Everyone has heard the inflation story. Year-over-year inflation is at about 7.5%. So this is already starting to impact us here in Garrison, as it will across the country. And we'll speak more to that later in the presentation. The next slide, some more objectives that we have are to maintain budget lines that are very close to actual spending. In years past, we did have some lines that were high, and spending then came in far below, and it created a surplus. We think it's much better to have projections on spending that are very thoughtful, carefully planned, and based on past spending as well as our analysis of future spending that is needed. Also, maintaining a 4% fund balance we think is critical. Fund balance is really your money that is there for true emergencies. If there's a facilities emergency, you need money to repair things, such as, let's say, a roof leak. Last year, you may recall, with the pandemic, we did use fund balance to provide remote learning. So again, maintaining a fund balance is important. It's security for the district. The next objective is to maintain staffing levels and programs that support the district's goals. Most of you may know we have engaged in a thorough strategic planning process for the past 2 years. We've established some amazing goals. We've already started to pursue some of those goals, and we need the staff and the resources to do so. The last bullet is to maintain professional development that supports the strategic coherence plan. PD is critical to the success of a district. So you have a professional staff, and you need to support them with time to learn and expertise and outside consultants and things such as that. Dusty, the next slide. This is just an outline of our vision of a graduate, which is part of the strategic plan. It actually was the first part. There you see the 3 attributes that we want all of our 8th graders to have when they leave our school, and all of the dispositions. There are 3 dispositions. So this has been shown before. By our next budget presentation, we will have an official strategic plan to share with the community. Jonathan Costa, our consultant, will be here to share, and of course, we'll give more details, and you'll see this slide updated. But I can tell you many of the initiatives revolve around goal setting and PD, and that's something that we are committed to. The next slide talks about class size. Now, this is very important for parents, for our staff, as well as the entire community. So what you see on the left is our actual enrollment right now in Garrison. And then towards the right, these are our projections. So for example, right now we do have 1 kindergarten class with 18 students in it. Next year we are expecting the need for 2 sections of kindergarten. That's based on registration that just wrapped up, and we registered officially 21 students. However, we do expect that number to increase. Historically, from this time of year, March, April, over the course of the summer, that number only goes up. So already 21 is high for kindergarten, in my opinion, and therefore, if we go up to 26 or 27 or even possibly 28, we would recommend 2 sections of K. But then moving up, we are foreseeing the need for 1 section of first, 18 students, 1 section of second grade with 23 students, 1 section of third with 21 students, 1 fourth grade, 21 students, and still maintaining 2 fifth grades. The rationale here is they are currently in 2 sections. There would be 1 class of 11, 1 class of 12. Dusty, middle school, please. The middle school projections are changing a little bit year over year. Currently, we have 1 sixth grade. We have 2 sections of 7th grade and 2 sections of 8th. What we are recommending next year is 1 section of 6th grade. There would be 24 students total. 1 section of 7th grade with 25 students total. And still maintaining 2 sections of 8th grade, 13 in 1 section, 14 in the other. Could break down 12 and 15, but it would be a fairly even split. I want to emphasize in 7th grade, even though you only see 1 section, the district will still have 2 sections of mathematics, because we do start accelerating in mathematics. Our program starts in 7th. So the students who are going to move on in 8th grade to take the algebra regions will start accelerating in 7th grade, and there will be a separate section. But for all the other classes, there will be 1 section. Okay, sticking with enrollment numbers, this is a new slide that we felt was important. We're looking ahead towards our students moving into high school. So what you see here is currently in our 2 high schools, O'Neill High School and Haldane, we have 59 students that are residents of Garrison that attend the 2 schools. Next year, there's a pretty significant increase, which of course we anticipated. Yet you have a smaller 12th grade class graduating from high school, and you have a fairly large 8th grade class moving up into high school. So the number 72 is based on us expecting at least 2 students to attend independent schools. Right now, we don't have firm confirmation on that, but we did look at past trends, and it seems like sometimes 1, 2, or 3 do opt for independent private schools. So this takes 2 students out of the mix. Our total high school enrollment would go to 72. Then in the following year, it would go up once again because our current 7th grade class is a fairly large class. They will replace a 12th grade class that's smaller. So you have another increase. Again, the assumption is that at least a couple of students will go to independent school. And then in the year 24-25, you see another pretty significant jump. And again, it's a very small class graduating that year, being replaced by a larger incoming 8th grade class that goes up to 9th. Next slide. Okay, so budget highlights, which is really the important things that we want to emphasize. The budget and the numbers that Joe Jimick will review are based on this. Eliminating, first, a director of facilities position. You may recall that our director of facilities and transportation did retire this year. We restructured all of those responsibilities. Mr. Jimick assumed some. 2 of our facilities transportation employees assumed some of the other responsibilities. So far, it has been working well. But we right now are recommending to the board that we don't need to replace that one administrator's position. The second bullet shows eliminating 2 teaching positions, This is, you see a little notation that this is by attrition. We do have a retirement, and late in the summer we had a resignation. We have a temporary person in that position now, but we do believe next year that we can meet all of our needs and all of our goals without 2 positions. Thirdly, we are recommending the elimination of 1 clerical position. This, of course, has an impact. It's not by attrition, but we are looking for ways to close a pretty significant budget gap, and this is something that we think the board needs to consider, and we'll explain more as we progress through the presentation. This is just a breakdown of staffing year over year. So you can see right now, currently we have 28.57. That just means 57% of a teacher. It was slightly modified, but pretty much what we budgeted for we have currently. Then our proposed budget for next year shows a reduction of 2. Our aides, we are projecting to maintain 5 aide positions next year, maintain 4 administrator positions, but then with clerical, you do see a one position reduction, and then with facilities, this is where the director of facilities and transportation position comes in. There's a reduction of 1. Continuing with the highlights, what this budget includes, a lot of important work that we've started and we plan to continue. You may recall, for our parents and board members, we've implemented a new K-8 math program. This is the first year. There's a lot of intense PD and a lot of resources that our teachers have been mastering, but we want to continue to support them. It's a very, very comprehensive program. It has a lot of different components to support differentiated learning, a lot of assessments, so we do anticipate more PD in the area of mathematics to make sure there's a real strong alignment K through 8. Also, our environmental education program, this is a major focus for the district, for our strategic plan, and we did create a new position last year, which is off to a fantastic start. We had a presentation earlier in the fall. We'll do follow-up presentations, but we have some ideas of scheduling changes that will support this program and some summer curriculum work to develop new and exciting environmental education instruction that will all kick off in September. And there's money in the budget to support resources as well as the experiences related to the program. Also, we are looking at taking a 9-period schedule and reducing it to 8 periods, but having the core academic periods be 9 minutes longer. So right now, we have 9 periods. Every period is 42 minutes. Next year, the core academics, math, social studies, science, ELA, will go up to 51 minutes. We did some research. We looked at high-performing school districts, and what we're seeing is most of them, if not all of them, have at least 50 to 52 or 53-minute core academic periods. We want to give our students every advantage, let them have that full amount of instructional time. We've consulted with our faculty on this, and that is the direction we're moving in. But also in this schedule, we will have quarterly classes, which is something new for Garrison. A lot of this learning does occur, but it happens throughout the year and in a cycle, maybe every other day or every third day. Now we will have art, debate, environmental science, and theater in a quarterly class, which means 10 weeks straight every day. And we actually think this will be a more effective way to deliver the instruction. If students are working on a project-based learning, environmental education project, or an art project, they will work on that every day, instead of working on it, then 3 days later coming back and revisiting it. So we do think this will be more efficient and more effective. We plan to continue offering band and chorus instruction in grades 3 through 8. We did have some turnover in our music department earlier in the school year, and currently the staff is just doing an outstanding job. It makes me very happy when I visit the rooms and hear our students singing and a thriving band program, and you will be very impressed at the spring concert. I promise you that, based on what I can see right now. The budget will maintain the Yale Ruler Program. This is our SEL program. It's an evidence-based program. We've been working on it for a couple of years, but there's further PD. New staff comes in, they'll be trained as well, and we want to maintain this grades K through 8. Our DBT program has received a lot of recognition. We won an award last year out of, I think, 46 districts. Garrison was selected as being one of the top districts for having success with DBT, thanks to our support staff and their hard work here, and the rest of the entire faculty, actually. So that's in the budget. Also supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've had a number of major initiatives, a lot of PD going on, and we have some other programs that we'd like to implement, so there is money in the budget for that. Also, we'd like to implement a new Bridges program. The board and I heard a presentation over the summer from a district out on Long Island that has a very successful program partnering with a neighboring school, and we'd like to implement a similar program here in Garrison for the upcoming school year. That money for that is in the budget. And also field trips. So this is not a huge cost driver, but in the past we've either collected money for field trips from parents. This year, we're thinking it would be much more efficient to set up a budget and early in the year talk to all of our teachers in grades K through 8 and have each one set up educational field trips aligned to their programs and make sure that all students have that opportunity, and it would be paid for by the district or paid for by GSEF, because GSEF funds a number of trips that have been going on for years and are very valued, and I think also PTA may even fund some of them as well. So we will still be partnering with PTA, GSEF, but now the district does have a budget line for field trips. We will not be asking parents to send in a check for $15.95 or something like that. Okay. At this point, I'm going to ask Joe Jimick to take over, and he will go through the details of the finances. Joe?
Joe, when you go to the podium, may I suggest, can we back it up just a little bit? It looks like this row here is having a hard time seeing the screen. Either that, or you guys are welcome to pick up your chairs and physically move them so you don't have to lean over each other as much. There we go. That should help. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Carl. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. It's really good to see everyone so that we can all understand the position that the district is in and why we're talking about the choices that we have in front of us. One of the main sources of revenue that the district has is our tax levy. The tax levy is driven by the tax cap formula that's set by New York State. The main components of the tax levy are the exclusions that you have of the tax levy and the allowable growth. The allowable growth factor is 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. So we know that the inflation is greater than 2%, but we are capped at that 2% growth factor. So we have a tax levy under the cap. The growth year over year is 209,000. So it's really not a lot of increase year over year underneath the tax cap. So one of the things also that we have ahead of us is we have a significant decrease in state aid for Garrison. And if you looked at the news in the past month or so, there was a lot of talk about how the governor's budget really increased the amount of state aid for school districts. And it really did, but it did in an area of the state aid that doesn't necessarily help Garrison at all. So most of the districts, most of our neighbors saw significant increases in state aid, and on average around 17% increase in aid. So big increases. But Garrison is expected to receive a reduction of close to 10%, or 97,000. And if you look at our neighbors in Putnam County, you see the state aid increases there. Some of them are very large. And when we were on conference calls with the other business officials, the situation is good for a lot of our neighbors. And you can see that there that it isn't for us. Next. So the governor's proposal actually met or exceeded the Board of Regents' request. So the Board of Regents said that they needed a aid increase that was basically very similar to what the governor actually proposed in her budget. So we don't anticipate that there's going to be big changes between the executive budget proposal and the adopted legislative budget. A lot of times what has happened in prior years is the executive budget proposal under Cuomo would come out with a number, and then once the legislature got involved, the number would get inflated to a point, and then you'd have a increase in the aid from the governor's proposal to the legislative one. We don't anticipate that we're going to see a big increase between the governor's proposal and the legislative one because basically, in terms of the top line number, it was very close to the regent's request. So we don't think the aid is going to change much or there's going to be a significant change to the formula which calculates the aid. But the district has formally requested some additional assistance from our representatives, Galef, Sue Serino, and James Skoufis will most likely be the legislature who is handling after the redistrict our school district. So there's the state aid and then there's the rest of the revenue. If you take a look at the state aid and you put it together with the tax cap, the big amount that you see in the change there is in a line item called BOCES aid. And you'll say, well, what's BOCES aid? So BOCES aid is the refund of the expenses that you pay for through the BOCES in the next year. So one of the things that we did last year is we had a program called iTutor to do the online instruction. And that was a significant expense. It was more than $400,000 for the iTutor program. You get aid in the following year, which is actually this year. You get aid based upon your aid ratio for the money that you spent in the prior year. So on the $400,000 that we spent last year for the iTutor program, we get 36% of that back in the current year. So that's why there is a large amount of aid, BOCES aid, in the current year budget, but not in next year's budget, because we're not doing iTutor, so there's a significantly smaller expense at the BOCES, and that translates into a lower amount of BOCES aid. So when you look year over year, if we use the same amount of appropriated fund balance in the 22-23 school year as we do in the current year, our revenue increase year over year would only be $151,000. So not a lot. This is the draft budget in its major components. There's 5 basic major components. There's the area called general support, which includes the administration of the school district, operation and maintenance, facilities, all those items, and the board, the budget vote, communication, central services, all those things are in general support. Instruction is all the classroom instruction, it's special education, it's nursing, it's counseling, it's everything. Everything that has to do with instructing kids. And then we have transportation, so that's transportation of the regular bus runs as well as special education runs and any sporting trips and those sorts of things. And then you have employee benefits, which is retirement, health care, those items. Debt service, which is the financing on the capital improvements. And then an item called interfund transfers. So if you have transfers from the general fund to other funds like the special aid fund or the capital fund, or in this case, we do have an increase in a transfer to the school nutrition fund, because we are potentially starting a school lunch program next year, and so there is a small increase of $10,000 for a transfer to the school lunch fund for that. When you look at an overall budget to budget, the increase there is $777,000, and that's a lot. Next slide. So what we wanted to do is talk a little bit about the expenditures that we can control and the ones that we don't have a lot of control over, and break that out. So there is basically an overview of the same sections of the budget without a couple of items included, okay? In this breakout, in the instructional piece, the component that is missing is tuition, both regular and special education tuition. And in the employee benefits portion, the health insurance is missing. So when you take those items out of the overall budget, you look at a year-over-year change on all those items, which represents 67 or so % of the budget. The year-over-year change in those items is $10,000. So not a lot. So basically what we're saying is, we are doing what we can to control what we can control. And we've got that down to a year-over-year change of $10,000, which is really insignificant. Next slide. Now when you break out the things that we don't have our control over, they are tuition and health insurance. And in tuition, there are 2 main components to that, which we'll get in as we go through the rest of the presentation. And in health insurance, the main component in that is a rate increase that is very large for this year, as well as some increased participation in the plan. So year over year, the items that we don't have a lot of control over, which is the rate at which tuition is charged to us for our high school and special education students, and our health insurance, those 2 items together are $767,000. So all of the increase in the budget to budget is in things that we don't have a lot of control over. And that's a 1% change year over year in those items. So it's a big issue, a big thing for the board and the public to understand, and to realize that we need to work to figure out how we can solve that issue. So let's talk first about tuition. There's a couple different ways that the schools can charge tuition. They can charge based upon a mutually agreed upon rate, so schools can negotiate with each other in order to determine what rate you pay, or they can use a state-generated non-resident tuition rate, which is called the Seneca Falls formula. And the reason why it's called the Seneca Falls formula is there was a commissioner's opinion many years ago where there was a dispute between Seneca Falls and another school district, and the formula that came out of that got named after them, so it's called the Seneca Falls formula. So how is this rate calculated? It's based on the expenses generated by the state aid claim in September. So every year, when the school districts are done closing their books from the prior year, they have to file a state aid claim to determine how much aid they're going to get in the upcoming year. So that's based upon the actual closed out audited expenses in the general fund, and it breaks it out to the amount of cost per pupil for K through 6 and through 7 through 12, and for special education students, it breaks out a cost. We get an estimated rate for the year that you're currently in December. So in December, we got the estimated rate for the 21-22 school year. You get the final rate for the year that was completed last June, is published in December at the same time. So in this year, we got the 2021 rate we got in December for last year. Next. So the school districts can bill monthly, quarterly, or yearly based upon the estimated rate. Once the year is done, if the rate changes, they can bill for the difference. And if the rate decreases, the school is eligible for a credit back on the difference. So for example, last year we had to pay an additional bill of $75,000 for Highland Falls based on the difference in the rate between the projected and the actual. And this year we will probably see a credit, but that does happen. So our big cost driver is the high school general education tuition will increase by $272,000. That assumes 19 students will attend Haldane and 10 will attend James O'Neill. The big story there, though, is the estimated rate is going to increase from $16,264, which is the estimated rate from the current year that we have now, to $21,473 for next year. And it's a 32% year-over-year increase in the estimated tuition, and it's more than 50% over 2 years. So what we want to get across here is Haldane did have an agreement with the district up until the 2021 school year, in that there was a mutually agreed upon formula where there was they took the tuition from the prior year and adjusted it by the amount of growth of their budget or the tax levy for the town of Phillipstown, whichever one is less, and that's what the increase was. That's what it was up until 2021. When we were developing the budget last year, we got contacted by Haldane saying that they needed to start charging the non-resident tuition rate, and they wanted to do that last year in full. And after negotiation back and forth, we got them to split that out over 2 years, and this is the result. But if you take a look at the tuition rates that we have there, those are the actual tuition rates that we have paid for 17-18 through 2021. 21-22 is estimated, and 22-23 is estimated as well. What was a big surprise for us was when we got the calculated rate or the estimated rate in December, that it was over $20,000 for the current year, when it was less than 19,000 in the prior year. So that was a big surprise, and that's part of the reasons why the numbers have moved so much. And here's the rates that we pay for O'Neill, and they have been using the non-resident tuition formula for quite some time. So one of the things that also is included in this budget is there's an estimate of 7 students in career and tech that attend through O'Neill. In the current budget, we only had estimated for 1 because in the past several years there had only been 1. There are currently 5 students that are attending tech education through O'Neill, and so we need to plan that there might possibly be more next year, so we're budgeting for 7. Special education tuition is going to increase by $314,000. There is an increase of 1 out-of-district placement based upon what we project for the upcoming year, and there's no 12th graders with IEPs that are graduating. And then we have some additional services for some of the out-of-district placements. There are 4 additional students that are going from Garrison to Haldane for next year. And the estimated rate for students in the 20 to 59% FTE is $40,792 per student, which is a 32% increase year over year. What I wanted to also talk about there is the rate increase in terms of the tuition. The rate increase makes up $351,000 of the total increase. So that's a significant portion is actually due to the rate, $351,000. So another great pressure on the budget is the health insurance premium. Initially, the projection was that the consortium needed a 6% increase for health insurance premium, and then essentially they did more forecasts based upon the actual spending in the plan, and the consortium asked for an additional vote to authorize a 8% increase instead of 6%. So originally it was voted to be 6% in the fall, and then last month the consortium came back to the districts and asked for another vote to increase the percentage for next year to 8%. This district, as well as 4 others, voted no, but 9 voted yes, because most of the districts, like I said before, had significant better position in aid, so they felt that they were comfortable to increase the rate more. So in addition to the rate increase, we have a higher number of participants and more selecting family coverage. The difference between family coverage and single coverage is between 10,000 for single and 27 for family. So that's a big part of the increase. Next. So these are some of the cuts that are included in the draft budget. So we have a retired teacher that's not going to be replaced in elementary, and that's estimated at $136,000 savings. And then we have a person who is on contract for AIS till the end of the year. That contract's not going to be renewed next year, so there's a savings for that. And we are recommending a reduction in the clerical position for a savings of $57,000. So what can we do with the budget gap? If we allocate $893,000, which is what we allocated this year of fund balance to support next year's budget, there's still $600,000 of a gap. In order to close the gap, we would need to use $1.5 million of fund balance in order to balance the budget, because we can't spend more than what the revenues that we generate, because that's not permissible. So to close the gap, we could allocate the fund balance, we could make additional cuts, we could override the tax cap, or any combination of those. So as we stated before, the high school tuition, the special education tuition, and the health insurance cost, all those items together exceed what the gap is. That's where the cost driver is in these items. If you close the gap with fund balance, which you can do, we're looking at, let's see here, using $1.5 million of fund balance, going from $890,000 that we project to use in this year to $1.5 million next year, which would leave you only $954,000 by the end of next year. There are some additional cuts we could look at. We could look at changing the transportation. There's a possibility that you could reduce the amount of buses. If we were able to eliminate transportation within 2 miles of the school and potentially reroute the existing routes that we have, we could save one bus run, which would be $91,000. Or we could make additional staff reductions that may have a negative impact on program. This is what the tax levy and revenue would look like if we don't do an override. If things stay the way they are, we would use $1.5 million of fund balance for next year's budget. We would have $954,000 remaining in 23-24, which, as you can see, would not be enough to necessarily support a budget in 23-24, because you could see the total revenue would actually be less for 23-24, and there wouldn't be any fund balance remaining for 24-25. And this is what the actual fund balance would look like. We're looking at negative numbers next year and in 23-24 and in 24-25. So one of the options is we take a look at doing an override. An override requires a 60% majority of the vote. It is possible to do an override. Last year there were 22 school districts that did an override, and 85% of them passed within the state. There was a budget in our region that failed. It was Carmel, but they did not seek an override. That was a budget within the tax cap. It was voted on twice, and it failed both times, so then it went to contingent. If you have a contingent budget, that means the levy that you have year over year is the same. So the $200,000 growth that we had in the tax levy would be zero. All right, so if you do a override of 8%, you would be able to support a budget in 23-24, but in 24-25, you would still have difficulties at being able to form a budget based upon a projected year-to-year growth of 3% in the budget. Now, 3% actually might be a challenge because of the inflationary environment that we're in, and that might still be not achievable. But this is what an 8% override would do for the amount of fund balance you would use for next year would decrease to $954,000 from the $1.5 million. Next. If you did a override of 10%, you would look at using $759,000 of fund balance in 22-23, and you would be able to get through 23-24 without an issue, but you would still potentially in 24-25 have some difficulties. And then there's the actual fund balance. If you did the 10% override, you would use 759 in 22-23, 915 in 23-24, and that would essentially allow you to get through those 2 years without any significant changes in the budget. So override, what does that mean for the taxpayer? The budget increase has an increase to the tax levy, and the tax levy increase based upon the cap is on a property per $1,000 of actual value. This is not assessed value, it's actual value, is 21 cents per thousand. If you did a 8% override, the increase is 78 cents per thousand. A 10% override, 97 cents per thousand. And then if you had a house that was valued at $300,000, if you took a look at that house with the tax cap, the increase year over year is $63. 8% override, it would be $234, and 10%, $291. And then if you did $500,000 value for a house, the year over year for the tax cap is 105. 8% would be 390, or 10% would be 485. Next. So what does that mean in comparison to our neighbors? Well, one of the things I think you'll find when you look around Putnam County is Garrison has the lowest tax rate. This is 2020 data, because that's the data that was most readily available at the time of developing this presentation. But there you have the tax levy per thousand of full value with all the different towns. And you can see Garrison is the only one that's under $10. Garrison is $9.68 in the town of Phillipstown, and go to the next page. And it also has some properties in the town of Putnam Valley, and that's also $9.68. So we're significantly lower tax than our neighbors. And you will find that when a school district does not have a high school and tuitions out high school, it is very typical that they pay a lower tax rate than school districts that have a high school. But when you look at the actual tax rate that we have, Haldane $16.54, and Garrison is $9.68 per thousand. So what we still don't know for next year, if our representatives will basically be able to steer us some more aid, and then if Haldane or Highland Falls will consider some relief for the high school tuition rates for components of those rates. So we take a look at the summary. The total is $12,470,000. The total under the district's control is $8 million. That's 64% of the budget. Those things increase year over year only $10,000, less than a percent. The items that are not in our control are $4 million. That's 36% of the budget, and they increase 21% year over year, or $767,000. Increase in expenditures are far exceed what we can raise under the cap. The district would have to allocate $1.5 million of fund balance and reserves in order to stay within a tax cap without cuts to program. Depletion of the fund balance and reserves will increase fiscal stress for the district. Use of $1.5 million will leave $954,000. as of June 2023. And $954,000 will not support the development of a 23-24 budget without cuts to program, tax cap override, or a combination of both of those. So the district should seek a tax cap override to avoid the excessive depletion of fund balance and preserve the program. Voters in the district can override with a 60% vote, and this would protect the district against unanticipated fiscal stress and the costs associated with inflationary pressures. We can use $1.5 million of fund balance in order to balance next year's budget. However, if there's some other unanticipated event that happens, we have another portion of the building that needs emergency repairs, or there's some other unanticipated need that we have to go into fund balance for. There may not be fund balance available if we use $1.5 million in next year's budget. The other thing that is related to fiscal stress is we do have to convert our short-term financing that's used to pay for the capital project into bonds. The bonds that we purchase are based upon the fiscal rating of the school district, and a significant use of fund balance negatively impacts our rating, which will cause the cost of borrowing to increase. Now we'd like to take questions. Oh, let me go through these dates. So far, the dates that we have scheduled is we have another budget presentation and forum on March 16th. On April 6th, the final budget presentation is presented and we seek the board's approval. On May 4th, there's a public hearing on the budget, and on May 17th, we have the vote. There may be additional meetings that are scheduled beyond these, but these are the dates that are currently on the calendar. We're potentially looking at some additional community forum events to be scheduled in the near future.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Carl, for all the time and energy you've put into this presentation. All right, we're going to open it up for questions from the board at this point. Who wants to go first? Anyone? All right.
I have to say, this is a really impressive presentation. I mean, it's very clear and very well done. One of the best that I've seen since I've been here. I guess I'd like to just have a little better understanding about what provoked Haldane to go up 50% over 2 years in terms of tuition.
Yes. So, from what we understand, when Haldane was developing their budget last year, they recognized that they had significant fiscal troubles in developing their budget without significant changes to staffing. They came to us in early March and said, we understand that you're paying non-resident tuition at Highland Falls. You pay a lower rate to us. We can't afford to continue based upon the rate that's by the formula. We need to go to the non-resident tuition rate. And Carl and I talked about it, and we estimated what that would be if they went to the non-resident tuition rate in full last year, and it would be a significant challenge for us. And Carl made some inroads with Haldane, and he impressed upon them the difficulty of implementing that in 1 year, and got them to basically split the difference so that they'd go from the non-resident tuition rate, from the formula rate that they were at, which was $13,980, to the non-resident rate over 2 years. But in addition to that, the costs at Haldane have been increasing even faster than anticipated. So when we got the rates in December this year, we weren't expecting to see a rate over $20,000 estimated for the current year that we're in now. And since the rate increased so much, year over year in the estimated rate, we have to budget next year for a increase on top of that. We don't know necessarily what it might be, but we have to be conservative, and we put another 5% on top of that. So, we started a couple of years ago with 13,000, and we're looking at 21 next year. So, what we did last year is we absorbed the rate increase with the use of fund balance, because we had already developed a budget, and at the late hour they said we need non-resident rate, so we absorbed that with fund balance for last year. The challenge is still significant for the upcoming year, and we need to budget for what we think the rate might end up to be. We won't know the rate that we're actually going to pay for next year until after the year is already done in the following December. So that's the challenge. What?
Is there a way to lock in that if we negotiate with another district, can we lock them in for multiple years? It sounds like do they just have the right to sort of change the tuition any year they want? Or can we have like a decade-long deal where we say, it just seems like it's set up to make the paying district have to scramble at any given moment. Is that true?
Well, we used to have a deal with Haldane that basically allowed for small increases in tuition. And if you look at that, that's the way it worked from 17-18 through 2021. What you don't see is that their actual calculated non-resident rate was going up faster than what that is, okay? The actual non-resident rate for Haldane by the state after the year is already completed, then they calculate what the actual rate was. In 17-18, it was 15,509. In 18-19, it was 16,116. 19-20 was 18,548. 2021, 18,992. So it was going above what their formula was calculating. So their cost, or their calculated cost per pupil, was going faster than what their ability to grow based upon their agreed formula with us. And they, as of the current year that we're in, they abandoned that formula, and they said we're going to use non-resident rate.
Looking to the future, though, there's no way to lock it. Like, I understand the past this happened, but to avoid this happening again, there's no way to. Is there a way to agree to a deal and then know that both districts will stick to that deal for a set number of years? Or
Yes, there is. So the district can negotiate with another school district to a rate and to a term. That's all. There's no limit to what can be negotiated. The fallback position, if there is no other thing that's negotiated, is the non-resident rate, the Seneca Falls formula. But we can negotiate something with the school district to come up with a different rate. Currently, we're not there. There are some additional negotiations that we want to do that would potentially help us for next year, but those aren't in place, and we have to budget based upon what we know as of this point.
And I'll just add to that I am in conversations with Phil Benante, the superintendent over in Haldane, and I do know that he has our presentation, he has our analysis of the cost, and he does understand the stress that this increase is placing on Garrison, and he was very receptive, but of course he has to now go to the Haldane board, and they need to consider, maybe giving us a fixed rate once again, Matt, but that's going to take some time. But we've started discussions, and I do hope we can come to some kind of resolution, because the choice of the two high schools dates back, as far as anyone can remember in these two districts. And I do think it is great for our students to have the two choices. I think it's a very nice feature of our school district. However, there you see O'Neill, Dusty, if you could just go ahead one slide. O'Neill is significantly less. Now, they are charging the NRT rate, they have for quite some time, but it is not as high as Haldane. This is a rate that is more manageable. Okay, so the information again is in Phil Benante's hands. We've had numerous discussions over the past 2 to 3 weeks, and he's receptive, but we don't have any firm answers yet.
Of course, Haldane's incentivized to have our students, right?
Sorry?
In terms of the negotiation, it's not just like we need Haldane. Haldane also needs us.
I would say
that
it's
a
a
fair-
mutually beneficial
Yeah.
relationship, yes. Our students are very sought after. Both high schools appreciate having them. So, yes, I think it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and therefore I do hope we can come to some type of agreement, because this is not sustainable. If you have a 2% tax levy, allowable tax levy increase, yet a 32% high school tuition increase, that just is not sustainable. Can't manage it.
Courtney? On slide 26, you discussed the extra cost for BOCE's career and technical education for a number of O'Neill students. Is that the case at Haldane as well? Isn't there a BOCE's program that students can go out to? Is that an extra cost? And why is that different?
There would be an extra cost, but we don't. I don't believe that we have any participating that we have ever been charged for.
Just to elaborate, this is a 2-year program. It's typically for students who are not college-bound, and there are great careers in the trades. Some of these programs, students can graduate with starting salaries, after high school of $60,000 to $70,000 with the technical training. So these are good programs for students who, again, are maybe not college-bound students. We are not required to pay for them. However, I do believe it's important for us to support that. But you do see it's very expensive. Now, the recommendation, the interesting part of this is we really have no control over the recommendation. It typically comes from the high school guidance department, in conversations with the student, with the teachers, and it is something that in junior and senior year, the students go to the high school for half day, and then they spend the afternoon at BOCE's doing technical training. So it was quite a surprise, and we had only one out of both high schools, one at O'Neill, as Joe said, but then that increased this year to 5. That's a very dramatic increase. Surprised us, and again, we need to find out more about how those recommendations are being made. I do recommend that we continue to support it, but of course there is a financial impact.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very easy to understand. I have a question on slide number 33. And what I'm understanding is that if there's no override, and I'll get to slide number 33, if there's no override, we pretty much have 1 year before we run out of fund balance, the general fund balance. If we do the 8% override, it gets us 2 years, right? The next year and the following year. Now, with the increase in tuition and healthcare insurance, we lost a year. So we wouldn't have had to do this 8% if we didn't have that increase, which is now giving us 1 year before we run out of fund balance. Is that more or less correct, right?
Yes. So by doing the override, you can essentially avoid making significant cuts this year and be able to still build a budget for the following year, and you would get 2 years out of that amount. There would still need to be some changes after that, unless we get some relief or are able to negotiate some better rates for tuition in the following years, because we do see those increases of enrollment that are coming. So, like I said before, the rate increase, that 32% rate increase amounts to $351,000 of the total increase. So it's basically half of the things that are out of our control. It's half of it. Is that? It's just the rate. We do have some increase in enrollment, as Carl pointed out, both in regular and special education. That accounts for the rest of that increase. But a full half of it is the Haldane rate increase.
My other question is, can you talk a little bit more about the center column here, the change in general fund balance, and the difference there?
Yes. So when you build a budget, you have to basically declare how much appropriated fund balance you're going to put towards next year's budget. So that's the first column after the year, is what was budgeted to be used in fund balance. The third column is what the actual change was, or the estimated change was in fund balance. So how much did you actually use? So if you look at 14-15, they had budgeted $631,000 of fund balance to be used. Only 156 was used. 15-16, 585 was budgeted to be used, but instead it went $800,000 the other way, and they had $395,000 more in fund balance. And then you see the amounts there. In multiple audit reports, there were comments in the management letters and things that suggested that the budgeting of revenues and expenditures weren't as close as they should be. So we took that into account when we developed the 21-22 budget. So essentially, the budget lines were basically tightened up so that they more closely matched what we were actually going to spend and the revenue that we were going to get. So that's why the change in fund balance is very close to what you see, is what we're projecting, is very close to what you see for 21-22. So that's the change. And in 2021, it got very close because you had to use so much fund balance to support the iTutor program. So that's actually why that got a lot closer than maybe was originally budgeted when the 2021 budget was developed.
I have a quick question. I'll go back around. So we're talking a lot here about an override, which I'm sure is kind of surprising to our community, in part because while we knew we had larger high school classes, there is this big increase in the Haldane tuition specifically and the healthcare costs. And I do appreciate the work we've done to tighten up these line items so we're being transparent in the budget, and not just continuously replenishing and going over the 4%. But my question then is, as we go out with this, our budget vote is scheduled for May. What happens if the override does not pass? Where does that leave us?
Okay, if the board chooses to do an override and it doesn't pass, there are several options. You can adopt a contingent budget and just go with that, or you can go out for another vote and go for an override again, or go for a budget under the cap. If that second vote fails, it's a contingent budget. So the contingent budget, essentially what that means is the tax levy is identical. Any equipment that's a part of the budget, unless it supports life, health, safety, or special education, is not included, and public use of the facilities is taken off the table.
Thank you. Courtney?
My question.
Oh, sorry. Then I have one other follow-up. We're looking at what we're trying to include in this budget, specifically for our K-8 program. And I know that's not what's really affected by these cost drivers. Our K-8 program is really staying very close to what it was last year. So when you say we're supporting K-8 environmental learning, the DEI, Yale Ruler, DBT, are these significant cost drivers in the budget? How much are we really talking about? What does that contribute to our overall spending?
A lot of the programs that are listed aren't a significant driver to the budget. The math program was purchased this year, and there are 5-year licenses for those, so that's not a big driver. The Yale Ruler program, I think, is in the $10,000 range. The largest components, largest drivers to our budget is our staffing. So changes in staffing will change the budget, but these programs do not. Now together they add up to some amount, but it's not. These aren't the overall cost drivers.
Thank you. Kent, and then we'll go to Matt.
Thanks again to both of you. This is an incredible amount of work, and I know that you've been peppered with a lot of questions from myself and Sarah and everybody else, and you guys have been great in responding to those, in putting this together. This is more of a statement than a question, I think. At the end of the day, it's clear we're in a situation where circumstances outside of our control put us in a position where we're going to have to ask the community for help. The question is when we should ask, how much we're going to need. I don't think we know the answer to those questions tonight. We're not going to know for a couple weeks. I think, in my opinion, it's going to have to be a combination of tactics. It's not, we override it and we're all good. Obviously, that's not the case. Not one thing is going to fix our situation. So I think over the next few weeks, we need to dig deeper and create a matrix of tools that we can put in our toolbox to try to tackle some of these problems and put together a solid plan that addresses these problems, not just for next year, but for the years to come. But I also think it's really important that we get a lot of community feedback in doing that. So I'm going to continue to work with Joe and Carl, but I would encourage everyone listening on YouTube or here tonight to send in suggestions. I mean, in my limited duration here on the board, I've learned that state budget financing is much different than private business financing. But certainly there are things that we can do and solutions that we can come up with, we have to come up with to solve this problem. So I don't really have any further questions, but I just wanted to make sure that I encourage the community to get involved in this process because there are a lot of smart people in Garrison, a lot of ideas, and we certainly need support no matter what we do, whether we ask for help or not this year.
Thanks, Kent. Matt?
I think this is an ignorant question, but it may be.
Questions are welcome.
Well, we'll see. We just sent out a survey to the community in the last month saying we had all this money from the government to spend. I'm assuming none of that money, that money is sort of allotted, like that money can't be used for any of this stuff. Is that true? Because part of the discord is feeling like we just got all this money and now feeling like we don't have any money.
Well, the grants that were part of the rescue plan are for a specific purpose. There are some restrictions on what that is for, and the items that are in the grant aren't related to anything that's in the budget. There are some items in that grant that could be used to offset current expenditures, but the grant is so small it really doesn't make a large impact on next year's budget if you take out the things that we have to use for the grant's purpose, like after school and summer programs and those sorts of things. So while you could use some of it to support next year's budget, it doesn't deal with the fundamental problems that we have with the overall cost of the items that are well outside of what we can directly control.
Thank you. David? I can't find the state aid slide, but I remember it well enough to know that there's this glaring fact in it that all the other communities in Putnam County do well and we don't. So how realistic would it be to believe that our heroes in the state legislature could actually turn that around? I mean, what's the pushback they would get if they went and they said Garrison deserves, not to be cut? What's the argument for cutting Garrison compared to the other communities, and is there a chance to change that?
Okay, so there's, in the aid formula, the biggest increase was due to something called foundation aid. Foundation aid is a very actually complicated formula that is supposed to equalize the amount of aid that's provided from the state to support school districts based upon actual need. And when we say actual need, it has to do with wealth factors of the area as well as of the families. It has to do with factors as to the percentage of special education students, the overall enrollment, and also those sorts of things. When you use the foundation aid formula and you put Garrison's numbers in, you come up with a number of like 400%, so that Garrison actually gets significantly more foundation aid than it should get by the formula. But every year, the foundation aid has been increased by something called like the hold harmless position, which means that they set a floor at which the foundation aid can increase year over year. So they don't keep the foundation aid flat, they increase it based upon the hold harmless amount, which in this case, this year, it's 3%. So foundation aid increased 3%, but our biggest component of change in the aid was the BOCES aid, which is called an expense-based aid, which means that based upon what you spend in the prior year, that's multiplied by your aid ratio, which Garrison's is 36%. So 36 cents on every dollar that Garrison spends in the prior year, they get back as BOCES aid in the following year. So our reduction is the difference in the fact that we purchased iTutor in the prior year, and we're getting aid on that 400,000 plus that we spent in iTutor in this current year, that we're not doing iTutor next year, so there's $400,000 less expense, so then there's less BOCES aid that comes back. So there's a reduction year over year. It's not because necessarily that they're singling out Garrison and punishing us. It's that the BOCES aid that we get is based upon what we spend, and we didn't buy iTutor this year, so we don't get big BOCES aid next year.
Just to clarify, so if you took out the BOCES aid, we'd get a 3% bump in state aid.
Well, we get a 3% bump in that one line
Right.
item, which is $15,000.
But the iTutor piece is punishing us basically this year because it's all delayed reimbursements year after year. In reality, the state aid for Garrison was really about 3%, and everybody else was up much higher. Everybody else was in the 8 to 10%.
Yes.
If you take out the BOCES piece with a kind of a one-time thing.
Yes, and that's why I think, as administration, we understand that with a narrative that's in the public that, the schools got a lot of state aid, that when you look at the state at large, they got a lot of state aid, and there shouldn't be problems with balancing budgets, right? With those big increases that you see there. But that doesn't, because of the way the formula works and where we are in that formula, it doesn't help us at all.
Just again to clarify, is this, to put it in another way, is this in some way a penalty for having a wealthier community? I mean, is that the formulas are such that communities like Garrison, they're maybe better off than some of the other communities are being penalized? Is that what's going on here?
What I would say is we are not necessarily being penalized. What has happened in the past is there was a foundation aid formula that was established a number of years ago, and it was never fully funded. Okay, there was always what they called a gap. If you watched budget presentations years ago, there's a gap between that the governor should fully fund the foundation aid formula. And this budget for next year, in most cases, either balances the foundation aid formula and it makes those districts up to the level of what the formula would be, or it got them halfway there this year and it's supposed to go even higher than the following year. So there are some districts that were significantly reduced in foundation aid that are going to get another bump in the following year that is significant. But some of these districts have higher number of students participating in free and reduced lunch, which that's a part of the formula. Brewster is one of those. That's part of the reason why that has a very large increase. So,
if I could just add a different perspective or a broader perspective, the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association did an analysis of every district in Westchester and Putnam. So now you're talking closer to 50 districts. Out of 50, give or take, only 3 lost overall total aid. Garrison, Pecanico Hills, by 11%, I believe, and Byram Hills, I think, lost 2 or 3% overall aid. So I think the point that Joe is making is almost everyone benefited from this new foundation aid formula. So it's popular. Districts are happy. Most districts, even though inflation is seeping in and affecting everyone, homeowners, families, as well as school districts and municipalities, those districts are able to handle it better because the median increase across the 2 counties, David, was 17%. But as you could see, some districts got a 20% increase, 25% increase in state aid. My disappointment is some of those districts are pretty wealthy. So as Joe said earlier, it's a complicated formula that we don't fully understand. It's a very complex formula. I do understand a high needs district getting a higher amount, a higher percentage of state aid, but when you look across Westchester and Putnam, you see some very wealthy districts getting, one in particular got 25% increase. So it's hard to say, because of Garrison's wealth, is that why we're held at that minimum 3%? I don't know, but the reality is we are held at the 3% this year. It would have been nice to get a 10 or even 12% and offset that loss in BOCES generated aid from the previous year. We reached out to our local assemblywoman, our state senator, and the incoming state senator because New York is redistricting. They were all receptive. Sarah and I met with them, and I followed up with phone calls and formal letters. Senator Skoufis, who is the incoming senator, was helpful, but I think he was being honest with me that don't hold your breath for redoing the entire aid formula. I think it's too popular. People are satisfied, and most districts did fairly well. What he is going to try to do is look for some grant money, or potentially, they have some discretionary spending. Maybe something could be steered to our district because, again, comparatively, we did not do well with state aid. However, he did tell me that we would not hear back from him with any definitive answer until early April.
To be clear, that's a small amount. He's not necessarily going to cover our gap. And it certainly doesn't help us year over year in terms of what we're looking at. It might help us for a one-time expense. And I echo, and I really appreciate Carl reaching out and really lobbying our assemblywoman and our senators, but I don't think that is the thing we should hang our hat on or the solution to this problem. It might help for a little bit, and we would appreciate any help they will give us, but I don't think that's where we're going to find our solution. Jocelyn, did you have?
The 10% or 15% increase in aid, we still have a budget gap of like $400,000 or $450,000. So we still are facing a proposed budget that has cuts that is also short. So it's a tough situation for us.
Of course, I have more questions too. Let's keep going.
I think one thing that I've certainly learned through this process is that all of this is fluid and it keeps changing, and there's, I've personally get so frustrated by the fact that you have to create a budget based off of basically imaginary numbers and numbers you're not going to get until 9 months from now. But is this foundation aid formula, this is set and this is the way it's going to be going forward, and so this is going to be an issue for us every year. I guess that's more of a statement. Is there any way we can game the system here, or like?
Colleges do with U.S. News and World Report. Can we figure out what the formula is and do what we need to do to fit the formula?
Well, there isn't any way that we can game the system, but what we can do is make sure that we're capturing all the correct counts. One of the things that before I arrived, the number of students that were economically disadvantaged weren't being counted, and so we are counting those now, and that will work its way into the formula. It's not much, but it'll help. That's what we can do, is we can make sure that our aid claims are correct.
Publicly saying he's going to game the system. That's really, I do appreciate it.
Do you need to, I guess, know how to proceed, right? Is that having another meeting? And I guess the question is whether we go for the 8%. Yes.
Next meeting on the 16th, we're going to start making some decisions. So my next question for the board right now is, and you can send this afterwards too, what information do you need to see to help make these decisions? What new slides do we need in this presentation? And I'll jump in with one question here that I think you look at this budget and you see, okay, we have 800,000 estimated in our, I can look up the exact number, in our transportation budget line for this year. That's going up to about 912,000 next year. So we look at that, and yes, that currently is beyond our control under the contract. Joe, I know you've run some numbers on this. Is there a way to bring transportation under our control in-house, and does that save us money, or does it end up costing us more due to what Orange County provides for us under this contract?
Yes. So the major components of the increase year over year for the transportation is there's basically 3 items. Okay, there is the increase year over year based upon a CPI number. Right now, we don't know what that number is yet, but we are anticipating it's going to be more than 3%. We are budgeting for a year over year CPI increase of closer to 6%. So that is part of the number. The other part of the number is a increase in the amount of the cost of diesel fuel. So there's a significant increase in the budget for diesel fuel. The third item in there is an additional special education run above and beyond what was in last year's budget that's included in next year's budget, because that is a active route that we currently do. Now, we are going to be looking as closely as we can to the number of routes that we do to see if there's any way that we can combine some of those and get some efficiencies. But there's always pressure because we are small, and if we're not able to do a cooperative run with another school district, each one of those special runs is a high cost. If we took a look at, let's say we wanted to bring some of the transportation in-house, and we look at, okay, let's purchase additional large buses, and let's get staffing for and do our own transportation. The cost of a bus of a diesel bus right now is around $120,000 for a large 64-passenger bus like Orange County uses. If you wanted an electric one, because there is some interest in the community for electrification, the current pricing on those is $350,000 for a 66-passenger bus, and then you would need to basically put the infrastructure in place to be able to charge it, and that would be an additional cost. There are some incentives with the EPA that is just getting started for electric vehicles and reduced pollution vehicles. There is one other option as far as reduced pollution vehicles, and that's propane. You could purchase a propane bus, but then you'd have to install a propane filling station on the premises. That would probably, including the architect's fees and the construction and all that, that would probably be around $60,000 for a propane filling station. But if we went to diesel and you purchased a diesel bus, you typically bond that over 5 years. We would need to put that as a proposition on the vote, and I believe the deadline for propositions is in a couple of weeks.
That's the 16th as well.
That we'd have to include that that we were going to do a proposition. We'd have to decide that by the 16th. If in the environment that we're in with the shortage of bus drivers, we anticipate in order to attract a bus driver, we would need to have a full-time person. So if you add the cost of a full-time person as well as the cost of the bus, that exceeds the cost at what it costs us to purchase a route with a driver through Orange County by $10,000 a year for the 5 years that you're financing the bus. So there isn't necessarily a savings by doing our own transportation from a green field, you know.
Those slides, though, may be helpful for the community to see going forward.
I think one of the tools that I mentioned, I think we need to have kind of an outline of the impact of doing an override this year versus next year on the fund balance, 8 to 10, or 8, 9, 10 this year versus next year, what that looks like in out years. I think what we don't want is to have to continually come back and ask again in 2 years because we didn't do the right thing. If we're going to go to the community, we need to go to the community with the right ask. We need to go to the community with the right, go to them with show some sacrifices here too. That we're not asking everybody to bear the brunt of the entire cost. I think we have to thoughtfully do this. So I think knowing the impact of this long term as well, so that we're not back in this situation in the future, is really important.
Yeah, the only comments that I'll make towards the override this year versus next year, there's a couple advantages to doing it this year as opposed to next year is, you have a story of the 32% rate increase this year. We don't know necessarily what the rate increase is going to be next year. Obviously, we don't think it's going to be 32%, but we don't know necessarily what it's going to be. And then if you have a tax override this year, then your tax levy cap that you do for the following year is based upon your override amount. So you're increasing based on top of your increase in the prior year, so it sort of compounds it. Those are the only advantages this year versus next year. But I think we can do some more things to kind of show the difference between this year and next year in our subsequent presentations.
Just to be clear, there have been some questions about the base tax cap and how does that, can you do different types of taxes for different types of residents, low income, those kind of things. I know one of the things I'd like to look into is the possibility of, can you tax a second home at a different rate than a first home, those kind of things. Are there ways to raise revenue in looking at some of those things as too, which is probably a unique thing that we have in our community that we might be able to take advantage of.
To go along with that, I had a conversation with the assessor for the town of Phillipstown within the last week or so, and we had some discussions about homestead rate versus non-homestead rate, and what does that mean? And homestead rate is, there are some districts which have, or some towns, it's a rule that's established by the town taxing authority, whether or not you have homestead or non-homestead. The properties that qualify for the homestead rate is basically any house or condominium that is owned by a single person. It doesn't necessarily have to be a primary residence. It can be a second home. So second homes still fit in the homestead exemption. So the only thing that would really fall out are condominiums and apartment complexes that are owned by a corporation. They would fall outside of the homestead, as well as commercial property. Garrison does not have a lot of commercial property and doesn't have significant apartments or condominium complexes that are owned by a corporation. So homestead exemptions are not an option to kind of change or lessen the burden for one group versus another. As far as income-related tax rates, there isn't anything for that. The only thing that happens with that is the STAR and the enhanced STAR exemption, but that doesn't change the amount of revenue that the school district can generate.
Madeline?
Can we still consider out-of-district students in charging tuition? Is that
That's just a change.
a consideration?
As head of policy committee, we will be discussing that actually, I believe, next week in policy committee.
Okay.
Say, so let's go back, because this will lead to my next question too, to the class size that we currently have, because a non-resident tuition policy would be based on having space within that class, so that we do not have to hire another teacher, because then the tuition doesn't help us. It basically increases our cost. These class sizes are running pretty high. Now, you do see in 5th grade, there is lower numbers, but we're pretty much looking like there's not a whole lot of room in some of these. So I don't know how much space there's going to be, interest there's going to be, or how much revenue that would really generate. And then in your middle school, you're getting even higher there. And then this brings me to my next question. Does that help, Madeline? And then the AIS position, I just wondered if you could expand a little bit, Carl, on what our current staff is going to do to help us eliminate that position by really assuming more responsibilities and helping us out on this.
Sure. There will be no reduction in AIS services, Sarah. The way we reworked the schedule, earlier I mentioned that we're going to an 8-period schedule. Also, when you look at the enrollment in the class section slides, you will notice at the middle school, for example, in 7th grade this year, we're running 2 sections. Next year, it'll be 1. Therefore, our teachers have 1 less teaching period. And our plan is to have, for example, our English teacher teach English AIS, our math teacher teach math AIS. So not only is it good because the students are very familiar with the teacher and vice versa, the teachers know the curriculum. So they will be able to deliver, in my judgment, very effective AIS. If a child needs an extra period every other day of math or ELA, I do think they'll get quality instruction right from their content area teachers. So that is the way the master schedule is written for next year. Therefore, we feel comfortable making the recommendation that although that position existed in the past, that we don't need to continue it going forward.
And just to clarify, AIS This means academic intervention services, and
Yes.
is differentiated from special education, which are still delivered through our special education teachers, correct?
You are accurate. I'm sorry for using all the acronyms in education, but academic intervention services, if a child is not classified in special education, receiving special ed program, but they're struggling in one of those subject areas or just need a bit of more support, that's considered a building level service. So it is support, it's separate from special education, it's an additional support that we give our students who need it.
Thank you. And we will still be able to service our English as a new language students who have requirements as well under this, which is covered under the current one-year position as well.
Yeah, that is correct. In a similar way, by combining those two sections of 7th grade, it does free up some time from our Spanish teacher, who also has her certification in ENL, and therefore will be able to provide support. We have only a handful of students receiving ENL services, so we are confident that we can cover that program as well.
Thank you. All right. As much as I'd love to spend the entire evening here, I do think we want to start wrapping this up for our first budget discussion, but we do have a really big decision, and I will remind the board that going out for an override, if that is something we choose to consider, the board cannot advocate one way or another with the voters. That has to come from the community. The board can tell people to vote, we cannot tell them how to vote. So this lift will be on our community as to getting out the message, if that is what they decide they wish. I think Kent really said this earlier, we need to hear from our community. What are their priorities? There's a lot of different ways we could go. We can clearly renegotiate with our high schools. We can continue those discussions. We are not locked in. We've had high school choice for a while. That is something that seems to be important, but we need to hear from the community on a lot of these issues. Our K-8 program, we would love to preserve it in the way that we've shown. We're not making massive cuts, but if we don't get an override, we're going to need to make cuts, and I don't know if there's a whole lot more room in there for these cuts. But it's March, and the vote is in May, and it has to be in May. So there's not a lot of time, and this is a new narrative. And I do agree with Matt's point that we just sent a survey to the community asking them how to spend the American Rescue money, which I understand is about $250,000 spread over 3 years and has to be used for other things as well. But this will take some time, I think, for the community to come around and understand this narrative. And I do have concerns about getting to that 60% this year and what it means if we don't for a contingency budget. I certainly don't want to find ourselves like our neighbors in Carmel with the contingency budget next year. So on that happy note, if there's any other thoughts, anything else you guys need to see in the next presentation, please send in your questions so we can make sure anything you think the public needs to see that needs to be clearly communicated. Let's get that in this presentation so that people understand what we're talking about. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Joe, and thank you for going to our high schools and continuing those conversations. I think that's going to be really important to us moving forward. All right, any other thoughts? Last chance? I'm going to move on then. We now move to the first public comment section of this evening. Dusty's going to grab the list for me. I'm going to read my paragraph here. Public comment is intended for members of the community to speak openly and voice concerns. In accordance with Policy 3220 of the Garrison Union Free School District, any person wishing to speak shall comply with all provisions of this policy. Comments about specific school personnel or individual students is a violation of board policy. Concerns regarding students or personnel should be discussed privately with the superintendent or appropriate administrator. Comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and speakers are asked to conduct themselves in a respectful manner. The board will listen to comments but will not engage in dialogue. Any necessary follow-up will be noted and provided through the appropriate channel. Members of the public wishing to speak during public comment period are asked to place their name and town of residence on the sign-in sheet and will be called in order to speak, and we are not on Zoom, so I'm going to skip that part. Mr. Rausch, can I invite you to the podium, please?
Evening, everybody. Ned Rauch from the PTA, father of first grader Louise and incoming kindergartner Augie Dog. I'm going to move from the cheery topic of the budget to another rosy topic of COVID and the pandemic. But sincerely wanted to speak tonight to thank Carl, Ms. Emig, Nurse Melissa, the faculty and the staff for their leadership, their dedication to the school, their extreme competence and their unending care that they've shown throughout this pandemic, throughout these 2 years. And now we're stepping into this new phase, this new reality of the pandemic. And while COVID isn't over, I and my colleague Grady here from the PTA, we very much believe that the school, students, the faculty, the staff, that it's all in good hands that are connected to sharp, prudent minds. And we know this hasn't been easy, but we know that without you, it would have been much, much more difficult. So sincerely, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rauch. And if anyone else wishes to speak, I still have my sign-in sheet here. You're welcome. Come on up. Here, you guys sign in though, please. That's all right. Thanks.
Hi, Grady Oaks, I live in Garrison. And also I just wanted to say, I came here to say thank you. I'm so grateful. I grew up in Texas. COVID wasn't a thing. My other half of my family is in Los Angeles and nobody went to school for the last 2 years. Their kids really struggled. They're exceptional at video games, but they really struggled. And I know how hard this district worked to, moving money around, moving people around, bringing people in, and my daughter's thriving, and I'm really grateful for that. So I just want to say thank you, and appreciate everything that you're doing. Thanks.
All right, do I have anyone else? There will be a second public comment section at the end of this meeting, should you change your mind. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. I'm going to move next to President's remarks. I will try and be brief. We do have a joint meeting with O'Neill, which will be, oh, bye, you're all leaving? This is the fun part, guys. We're going to talk about some contracts next. No? Okay. All right, so guys on the board, you get to stay. We have a joint meeting with O'Neill that's virtual tomorrow. We're going to hear from some of our students who are there, so I hope those of you who are able to attend, it should be a good time. I want to acknowledge that the board and our administrative team have received a lot of feedback from the community, recently specifically regarding masks. We understand that there are a range of positions on this issue, as I'm sure there will be on our budget for next year. I want to say that we hear you, we value your feedback, and we are in the process of responding to everyone. We hope you will continue to share your thoughts with us in a constructive manner as we move through this budget process going forward. Really, we want to hear from you, and if you don't hear back from us within 24 hours, please don't take it personally. We'll get to everybody. All right, now we are going to continue on. That's all I had. Carl, you're up.
Two brief comments. First, thank you to our parents for recognizing the efforts of the staff. Yes, at the administrative and board level, we are making some decisions and important decisions. We try to do so based on the guidance and the experts. The current lifting of the mandate was recommended by the CDC, recommended by the Department of Health, and recommended by our local Department of Health based on the metrics in this area. And with that, I did feel very comfortable in moving forward today. And I'm very pleased to report to everyone that our students did an amazing job. There was a percentage of students that chose to continue wearing a mask. I know there were some concerns that maybe that would be uncomfortable for them, and I can tell you firsthand, it was not. Students were respectful of one another's choices, and it was a day, I think, really for us all to celebrate. I think the staff and I just were so pleased with how this first day went, and we expect that to continue. So that is attributable to the staff. I know a lot of them needed to leave. They'll be up at 6 a.m. and back here working with our children, but I have to tell you, they just did an amazing job in making sure our children were comfortable with this significant transition. I mean, I looked at our first graders who never came to school without a mask. And today, some did, and again, and those who chose to continue wearing it, we respect that. And please don't hesitate to call Nurse Melissa, Mrs. Jimick, your classroom teacher, your child's teacher. We will help you. If you're struggling with a decision, reach out. The other thing is we keep receiving a couple of hundred test kits per week, and they do have expiration dates. And so please, I encourage our community, just reach out. We're happy to give you kits for your families, and we really encourage testing, because as we get into the spring and allergies and things, we need to be diligent, especially that masks are optional. But we have plenty of test kits, and they're very costly, but they're here in the school, and please take us up on that offer.
The state sent those to us. We didn't buy them.
Yes.
So while they are costly, they are not costly to us.
They're not in the budget and driving up our budget. They're provided by New York State Department of Health. Secondly, again, Joe mentioned this earlier, but we do have formal budget presentation scheduled, but I do believe, based on this complex budget, that we need to add some sessions. We will get that information out within a week or so, but I think we will definitely do a less formal morning session. Maybe we'll have some coffee and donuts and invite our community to come to the school. And when you're not on camera, we could have a less formal setting where people can speak openly, because again, I know I'm being repetitive, but we want your input. And I know the staff has reached out to me, and we've had some early discussions, but those conversations will continue, and we also, with our parents and community members, we do want to hear from you. And that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. Any questions for Carl? All right, we're going to keep this moving forward. Jocelyn, you're up with a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee report.
Hi, sorry, I missed it last week, or last meeting, to give the update, because we met way back in February 8th. We had a kind of mini training with someone who works closely with April Francis, who we've all been trained by. And I guess I'll report on 3 things really quickly. One, we were awarded a GSEF grant, as you know, to bring in a dancer or dancers to provide kind of up to 6 days of dance instruction to the students, to reach all students at Garrison. So we currently have an RFA, like a request for applications, out there floating around. So if anyone knows dancers or dance groups that might be interested in applying, please pass the word. 2, we also are working closely with Desmond Fish Library, Butterfield, and Haldane on kind of community initiatives related to DEI, and so we're going to be releasing a survey soon in the next week or so. And 3rd, I think Ms. Emig wanted to have a March 8th DEI meeting, and I don't know if anyone wrote back and said that they could come, but Matt and Courtney, we might have a meeting next week. I'll follow up with her to see if she still wants to, oh, you can't come, but to see if she still wants to hold it. Any questions on stuff?
Questions?
Thanks.
Okay. Ken, do you want to give a Finance Committee update after our 2 hours of finance?
I have nothing further to add, other than, again, to emphasize the desire for community input.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you to the Finance Committee for your time. All right. Next, we're going to move on then to, unless there's questions, further questions on the Finance Committee. No, okay. Accepting the minutes. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District does hereby accept the minutes of the regular meeting of February 16th, 2022. May I have a motion, please?
Seconded.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Nays, abstentions. All right, now we're going to move on to the consent agenda. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, upon the recommendation of Carl L. Albano, Superintendent, hereby approves the items of the personnel consent agenda as presented. May I have a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Carl, do you want to speak to these briefly?
I'll just speak to one, which is a resignation. from one of our custodial worker bus drivers, Yadira Martinez. I just want to thank her. She wasn't with us that long, but she did an amazing job, and she received a wonderful job opportunity that was better for her and her family. So we wish her well, and we thank her for all the hard work she did here in Garrison. And that's all. The second one is just an adjustment of dates for a leave of absence. It's an amendment to something that we approved, I think, back in January, maybe? Yes, in January.
Do I have any questions for Carl on the consent agenda as presented? Okay, I'm going to move to a vote then. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to new business. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, upon the recommendation of Carl L. Albano, Superintendent, hereby approves new business items B through E as presented. May I have a motion, please?
Second.
Thank you. These are mostly health and welfare contracts, so I'm going to keep us moving along if that's all right. Unless anyone has any questions on these, we are obligated to pay these fees. Okay, thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions. Thank you. Okay. We're now at our second public comment section of the evening. I'm not going to read my paragraph again, but the same policy still applies. I have a sign-in sheet here. If anyone wishes to speak, you're welcome to. Okay, then, thank you. All right, I'm now going to move on to board member comment and other discussion. We'll go to Jocelyn first.
No comment.
No comment.
Thanks.
Okay. David? No comment? Okay. Madeline? No comment. Okay. Courtney?
Thank you to Joe and Carl and Finance Committee for the very thorough presentation and all of the information.
Thank you. Kent?
I just wanted to, again, reiterate my appreciation, echoing Grady there, just to the hard work over the last couple of years to get to today. Obviously, a big change today, exciting day. I asked my 5th grade son when he came home, how was it? He's like, it was kind of weird because everyone was just like smiling all day, which is just the greatest thing you could hear. So obviously, we're moving through COVID. We never know if COVID's going to come back, but we've gotten to a significant point here, and now we're facing a new challenge with the budget, which we went through in great detail tonight. I have no doubt we'll come through it, but I just wanted to recognize there will be hard choices, and just as the community has been really supportive and collaborative in this process with COVID, I'm really hopeful that we're going to have great engagement and respectful engagement throughout the situation. So again, thank you to everyone, faculty, staff, everyone that's been involved.
Matt?
That was beautifully said, but I have no comment, but that was great. Thank you.
I have no further comment this evening as well. Thank you for everyone who came out, though. Okay, now we are going to go into executive session. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby enters into executive session for the purpose of discussing the employment history of particular persons and discussing contract negotiations for tuition costs for Garrison students attending high school. May I have a motion, please? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Nays, abstentions. Thank you, everyone. We will adjourn without taking any further action this evening. Thank you very much. Log out and shut down your computers, please.